Sometimes the hardest moment in building something with God is not when it fails. It's when the thing that you have been building, that you've been called to, slows down and you cannot figure out why. So have you ever been 2 years into building something that you genuinely believe that God has asked you to build, and you're still showing up every single day, you're being faithful, and the results still look the same as what they did when you first started? That is exactly where I was not all that long ago. And I had this thought as I was sitting at my desk one morning that I almost didn't want to admit out loud. But I want to share that with you all today because I think a lot of you are in that same place and you don't have the language for what is actually happening. So that is where we are going, and I welcome you back to the Eden Edit. One of these mornings, it was a typical morning. So the only reason it stood out is because of the thought that I had. It was just a regular morning. I had my meeting time with God. I kind of call them like my CEO mornings, where I just sit intentionally with him before I start any work. And I ask him, what will you have me to do today, Lord? And I try to sit and listen. And, in this moment, I had my laptop next to me. I was getting ready to start. And I was kind of going over all the things that I had been doing with Eden and Empire, all the lives, all the content creation, all the writing, studying, years of building something that I really believe that God has placed on my heart. But the thing that stood out to me in this moment, I remember just staring at the screen after I opened up my laptop and thought, okay, well, there's still no visible proof that this is working. I'm not having anything that on paper looks like it is visible growth. There's nothing, no breakthrough moment, nothing that is standout. It's just me showing up every single day to something that looked the same as it did 6 months ago. And the thought that surfaced from that, I feel like was not a simple one that people just say out loud. So it was kind of complex. It was so much heavier than that. And the question to me that came up underneath all of that was just this very honest moment where I looked at the timeline and everything that I had been doing, my obedience, what I felt like was me walking faithfully in what God called me to. And I thought, okay, well, if I have been walking faithfully in this and I believe that God asked me to do it, why does it still look like this? And I sat there realizing how quickly my mind was just trying to figure out what the silence meant. Because I asked the question and nothing. It was just nothing. Does it mean wait? Does it mean that I need to adjust? And more importantly, does it mean that I misunderstood somewhere along the way what that meant, what I was called to do? So there was this moment that even in that, I caught something happening internally. And that's the part that I didn't expect. So even after all the work that God had taken me through over the course of a year, all the healing that he has done, everything that he's done in my heart, there is a part of me that was still waiting for the results to confirm that I was actually called to do this. Because if the thing grows, that means that God is in it. And if it stays slow, maybe I got it wrong. And that stopped me, if I'm being entirely honest, because I realized that I had been using my results as confirmation of my calling. And it caught me off guard because God is over here sitting in this moment with me, showing me that that's not how he works. And more importantly, that is not a stable place to live life in. And so I was doing something where I feel like in this moment, God was doing something in me that had nothing to do with my numbers and had everything to do with who I was becoming in the process of building. And here's what I've come to understand about these moments. And there's so much beauty in it. And I hate that it took me longer than I would like to admit. But when I have gotten to these places, there's so much that God is doing in my heart. There's so much that he's trying to change and transform. And there's a formation that has to happen when you're stepping into certain elements of your business. So when God slows a thing down, he's almost never telling you that you were wrong to begin with. Okay, the idea in and of itself isn't wrong. What he's usually doing is slowing you down, or slowing something down that got tangled up in the process of building that happened without you even realizing it. And so your sense of who you were got tangled into whether this thing grows or not, or if the thing is working, then he's in it or not. So when the business grows, you feel confident in your calling. And what God is doing in the slow season is usually the thing that is untangling, that God is trying to untangle in you. Those two things are generally where God is trying to work through, because they were never supposed to be connected in the first place. And the thing that helps me is in Proverbs 6:19. So it says, "A man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps." So he directs your steps. Not your launch, not your results, not your growth, your steps. Okay, so which means that the slow seasons aren't a detour from what he's calling you to do. It might be where he has you meant to be all along. Like he's meant for you to be in this season from the start. He has you exactly where you need to be. And so I'd love to go back to Abraham. He is one that I tend to really lean on in a lot of scenarios when it comes to my impatience. And so I want you to think about Abraham with me for a second. So he gets the call in Genesis 12, and God tells him to go. He tells him that he will be the father of many nations, and he tells him that a blessing is coming. So there's a lot of things that God is doing in this moment that I feel like with Abraham, he would be like, okay, God, you told me this, but there's a lot of details that were left out. You're not being super specific on the timeline, but Abraham waits. And it's not until Genesis 17 that God changes his name. So he goes from Abram to Abraham. And there are 24 years between the call and the moment where God finally says, now I'm going to rename you. There's 24 years in that Abraham is showing up. But in that, he's showing up to something that has not fully arrived yet. Okay, and there's importance in that. So what I noticed in those 24 years is that God was not making Abraham wait because the timing was off, or God needed him to be patient just so he could catch up. Like the timing wasn't off on God's end. He was doing something in Abraham that needed time. The man who was to receive the promise in Genesis 12 was not yet the man who could carry it in Genesis 17. The promise that Genesis 17 had for Abraham had to be prepared for. He had to be formed. He had to be shaped into the person that held the promise in Genesis 17. And God knew that even when Abraham didn't. And that reminds me so often, because more beautifully, the process that God took me through is he knew that the woman that I was when I first started Eden and Empire, in order to be the woman that I needed to be for the women that I coach, he had to take me through a process, and that was on his time and not mine. So the version of you standing at the beginning of this calling is not the same version of you that will be standing at the fullness of it. I know that God is so much more interested in making sure that you're ready for what he's calling you to than what he is in making sure that your timeline feels comfortable. And I want to, if you'll let me say this too, because I want to say something that I feel like will potentially reframe how you've been thinking about this season. I know that it did for me. So the reason that it often feels destabilizing as we are in these seasons is not really about business. And it's hard to not get the two mixed up. It's essentially the fact that somewhere along the way, without meaning to, we started treating our results as something that was evidence that God was with us in the process. When things are moving, you feel close to him. And when things start to feel stall, you feel like maybe you stepped out of your calling, or you stepped out of God's will somehow. And the thing that it does is it tells you that you stopped measuring God's presence in all of this. Essentially, you started measuring his presence by his presence, and you started measuring all of that by your progress. So his proximity to you was based on performance. And that's actually an easy thing to do. It's not necessarily us innately having this character flaw. It's just something that happens when you're in the process of building something that matters, especially when you're doing it in faith. But God cannot let you lead from that place long term. And that's the beauty of his heart, right? A woman who is in this place, God knows what it's going to do to her if she builds from this instability. So a woman who only feels secure in her calling when her numbers are going up, and then eventually starts to make decisions based on a fear instead of faithfulness. And she's going to try to perform, and she's going to do all of these things for her audience instead of building for a purpose. And God sees that coming long before she does. I know he did that with me. So what he does is he slows it down. Sometimes it feels like punishment, but it's not. He does it because he is a good enough father to interrupt something that would eventually cost you far more than that momentum would. So what do you actually do in these moments when he's doing the work in you? Because it's hard when no one has told you exactly what's happening. And I'm going to be honest, sometimes with God, it's hard to know what's going on. And I do not claim to have all of the answers because so much of this he's walking me through. But the first thing you do is to get honest about the real question underneath your frustration. Most of the time when women they come to me as a coach and they tell me that they're frustrated when things are not growing, what they're actually doing in this moment is saying, does God still see me in this? Did I fail? And the one that he answers directly is that he sees you, right? He has not changed his mind about you. He definitely has not changed his mind about what he's put in you. Those desires, that talent, the gifts that you possess, he is qualifying you for something that you definitely are not qualified for. And I mean that with all the grace in the world, but God in his mercy and how gracious, and I love how he works, is that he calls the ones that are not qualified. And what he does is he qualifies them in the process. And so the second thing to do is really start paying attention to what is actually growing in you right now, because something is. And it's often a slow season that gets our attention and shows us that it means that something is going on. More often than not, it's not that nothing is happening. Okay, a slow season is to me an area where God is highlighting and inviting you to come in and be in communion with him, to just sit long enough to hear what he is placing on your heart. And so a lot of times what this usually means is the most important things are happening where we can't actually see them yet. God is moving with intention so much in our lives. I would say a majority of the time, there are things that we don't see and potentially won't ever see the fullness of it. And so I always invite women in to think of it like this. Are you getting more grounded in why you're doing what you're doing right now? Are you getting more clear on who you're building for? Are you learning to show up without needing that validation? That is real growth, even though it's not moving the bank account yet. You are getting so much more aligned with where God is calling you to be, and it doesn't necessarily show up in your analytics. And the last thing that I tend to see, and that God has taken me through in this process, is the one that actually shifts something for me personally. And so I had to really get honest about where I was putting my timeline. And it's crazy because I don't know why I operate in this way, because the calling is the thing that God gave us, right? He gave me this calling. The timeline is what I added to it. He never said, do this within this period of time and then XYZ. I don't know of many times where God tells you to a T exactly when something is going to happen. Most of the frustration that I think that we have in slow seasons is not actually about the calling at all. It's about the timeline that we built around things and them not going in the way that we planned. And so when you separate these two things, the slow seasons start to feel a lot less like something is wrong, and then more like something being settled in the area that it needed to be settled. So more often than not, it's not that we've fallen off track or things are, God intended for that. He accounted for all of those things. He planned for it. And I don't know exactly where you are in this season that you're listening to this. And maybe you're 2 years into it, like I was in that moment. Maybe you're 6 months in and you're already starting to wonder. Maybe you've been at this for longer than what you would like to admit, and you're just genuinely tired. The fact that it is a slow season does not mean that you missed God. It means that He is doing His most important work in you right now. That is the most important part of the work. And that part just happens to be in you. And it's beautiful. That is the times when I have seen God do the best work. So if you are in a slow season, I would love to hear from you for sure, but I need you to hear this. I also would love for you guys to comment or send me a DM or anything like that and tell me how long you have been in this season. I'd also love to know how long you've been building for as well. And I read every single one of the comments, whether they come in from my DMs, whether they're on this YouTube, whether they are on TikTok, wherever you're at that you're seeing this. I want to know where you are in this journey. And if you're ready to be part of a community of women who are building through faith and business together, Eden and Empire is that place where that happens. There's a link in the description. And I will see you in the next one.